So hello, my name is Christina Chen. I've been emailing you, and it's very nice to meet you. Um, so I know that you wrote on your statements that your works generally invoke the faded look of old color photos, and I'm just wondering, is that intentional? Do you want your viewers to feel that, or are you particularly interested in those, I would say, older films and photos or anything like that?
Um, yes, I think the faded colors of like old photography or old movies, and it's a little bit also kind of my generation, what I grew up seeing on television and predating me also. Um, but I just think there's something kind of evocative and powerful in that, in that kind of early color photography, early film. I don't know. In my some of my bios, I mentioned like old sci-fi films. There's some kind of a magic to those old films. And even though in many respects, of course, they're very dated by modern standards of the special effects and acting, but there's something there that's intriguing and I find magical. And someone mentioned, even though I'm not working in black and white, how like old black and white films have like draw you into kind of a fantasy world. So a little bit, yes, that is definitely partly intentional. Yeah.
Yes,
Not my main thrust of my work, but definitely in there. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. Since you mentioned the white and black, I was actually going to ask, well, when people usually talk about dated films or photos, well, of course, like our first mind would go into like black and white, like classic. I
Mhm.
was wondering what makes, because I know that when you were younger, you were using ink and pen,
Mhm.
and I believe those are probably more maybe black and white or maybe
That's
blue.
true.
So I was just wondering what makes you like, or what makes you go into this colorful like world instead of like choosing black and white for the old films or photos.
Yeah, it's actually something I'd like to go back to, but I did start out more as kind of a cartoonist, illustrator. That was kind of my goal, and even studied with a wonderful teacher in that direction who taught me a lot. A comic book artist taught me a ton about drawing and rendering, and I always had a love of comics and comic strips. I think I'm also indirectly quoting that too because of the old comic books I grew up on, the kind of faded colors and the black and white drawings. That's true. Those also kind of harken back to kind of nostalgic black and white films. And there were certain great early artist illustrators who very intentionally developed that. Like there was a very famous artist, Milton Caniff, who was famous for his comic strips, Terry and the Pirates and Steve Cannon. And they were drawn. He was very influenced by the old noir films, and he drew things in these shadows, and he was sometimes called the Rembrandt of the comic strip. And I grew up looking at Milton Caniff, and I was very influenced. Lots and lots of artists and illustrators were influenced by him. Um, so, well, basically, yes, I started out wanting to be a cartoonist, illustrator, or working in that direction. Somehow I shifted my focus over to doing these kind of ethereal landscapes. Partly was a change of environment. I was living in a very urban environment. I was living in New York City for years. I started out life in urban environment, but then I moved out to suburbs, and I was out in nature, and I was influenced by that. There were a lot of factors in my life that caused the transition to the kind of work I do today. Some of it's kind of personal, or actually even tragedies in my life. And my early work as a cartoonist, I really kind of indulged in this kind of angst and negative emotions. And then somehow, as I got older, I decided I wanted to leave that behind, at least for now. I thought it's sort of like not funny anymore. Like to indulge in that kind of world. I just decided with my work, I wanted to move away from that. And there were all kinds of influences. I mean, for years I was actually studying Tai Chi in
Yes.
New York with a teacher. And then in this particular school of Tai Chi, they urge you to go outside and practice out in nature. And I
Mm,
practicing Tai Chi out in nature, and I'm among trees and beautiful field. So very different than the kind of gritty New York environment I was in before.
mhm,
I'm kind of grungy, so my work just began to reflect that, and
mhm,
some of those just those kind of energies you feel.
mhm, mhm,
It's a little hard to explain, but I kind of just moved away from the world of the
mhm,
cartoons, comics, though, and at times I think I will return to that too.
mhm,
Uh, I was actually in with a group of kind of underground cartoonists in New York. I was taking a course at the School of Visual Arts taught by a wonderful illustrator, Peter Cooper. You
mhm,
might have seen his work around, and he was kind of a crossover like illustrator, but he had been kind of like an underground cartoonist type. So I was influenced
mhm,
by them at that point. There was a wonderful artist who just did these fantastic illustrations, and he lived in a squat. You know, he lived in like an illegal apartment, like downtown New York. I mean, that was sort of the group I was in with. But then again, my environment, circumstances changed, my psychology changed. So I don't know if that there's
No, no.
some perspective on it, but I still love pen and ink and
Uh-huh.
work with pen and ink. And I don't know not many artists are using pen and ink as much anymore. There are markers, and so pen and ink is almost like an older kind of art form, and
Mhm,
it's quite a skill to really do
mhm.
well. So
Well,
I'm not sure if that answered any of
no,
your.
no,
Yeah.
definitely answers a lot. Well, I actually graduated from an arts degree, and then
Ah,
yes,
mm,
and I agree. Of course, like the experience, what you've been doing in your life, is certainly reflects in your artworks. And I was
yes,
actually
yes.
curious. Um, so I know that it took a lot of time, or I would say experience, or emotional to led you to create what you are creating today. I just wonder, how long do you think it takes you to actually realize that this is something that I want to create right now?
I think as I've gotten older, I've gotten a lot more open to just like things sort of come into my head, and I'm
Mhm,
sort of more open to that. I think when I was young, I'd kind of maybe push things away, or I wouldn't acknowledge it. Like all of a sudden, just something pops into my head. Why don't you do that? Why don't
mhm,
you do this? Why don't you sew a seam in such a manner? Um, but on the other hand, a lot of my process often is in the moment.
mhm,
Like I sit down in front of the paper and start messing around with things, and something starts to emerge. I think like most artists, maybe yourself, have that
mhm.
experience. You could sitting there and kind of screwing around,
Yeah.
um, and sometimes, in fact, sometimes I've been drawing. I'm just trying out different ideas or motifs on a paper
Mhm,
that don't really seem associated with each other. And then all of a sudden I see, oh, that makes a composition. And I would have never thought of it
mhm,
normally. Like it's sort of like breaking out of convention,
mhm,
your box. My teacher, actually, who was a comic book artist, said some very wise things about art. And he was saying how you have to like sort of step out of like normal reality to produce your art. Um, so yeah, in terms of deciding what idea I want to go with, I do have tons and tons of sketches, lots of ideas, lots of concept little drawings I make, but a lot of it also happens in the moment. And I start to work with some kind of form or texture, and then suddenly I see, oh, that could be a mountain, that looks like a flower. And I also see a lot of forms like more and more inside the
mhm.
paper. I see like I'm not comparing myself to Michelangelo, but Michelangelo claimed how he was releasing the statue from the stone, you know. So sometimes you
Uh-huh.
start screen and suddenly like you're seeing all these forms appearing on the paper, like, hey, I'm going to go with that, or I'm going to go with
Mhm,
this, or oh, that looks like interesting, or and some of it's accidental.
mhm.
But again, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
but I very rarely, yeah, it's not too often now that I say like, oh, I have this concept or I have an idea and I want to bring it to fruition. And many times I start with a specific idea, but it just winds up going in some other direction. And of course, the wonderful thing about creating art that you're not stuck in this box. So you could be sitting there working on the art and maybe you accidentally spilled some paint on your drawing or canvas or something. And all of a sudden, hey, wait, that's kind of cool. You know, maybe I'll use that blue or, you know, in my work, or maybe that's kind of cool. There's a splotch there. So it's not so structured or formulaic as a lot of other processes in life.
Yeah, so I know that most of your works right now, they're mainly used or painted or drawn by pastel. What did you make? What makes you decided that you want to use that medium? Because, well, since the show is a mixed medium and watercolor, I have to ask, in my opinion, watercolor and pastel, they have some kind of same feature or feeling towards it, whether it's transparency, whimsical, anything like that. What makes you choose pastel over other mediums to mainly work with?
Part of it is convenience, my working circumstances. I just don't have room in my living circumstances for a studio with paints and everything else. And so part of it is convenience. And I think I have to admit, coming from being a cartoonist, that I'm a little intimidated by painting, to tell you the truth, because and also the fact I grew up around great painting my whole life for two reasons. One was my mother was an important New York art dealer, and I grew up around great works of art. And also at one time I had sought to become an art historian. So it just sort of setting a high bar to actually try to paint myself, even though I've done some painting. And the pastel is very flexible and easy to work with. And at one point, I decided I wanted to have, though I've kind of moved away from this just completely seamless look to my work. I got kind of obsessed with that, like just like making it was embossed into the paper, like untouched by human hands. So I started working with the powdery pastel, almost like a watercolor wash, although it's more flexible in some ways than watercolor. So I started experimenting with effects with powdered pastel, and partly influenced by other artists I'd seen. I think I saw this woman's work, I forgot her name, so many years ago, and she did this incredible, like photorealistic things, but she said that she used a powdery pastel. So I just started experimenting with that, with getting this kind of seamless, no brushwork look to the work. And the thing that's changed, though, is I started combining it with other medium. So, and I started finding out all kinds of interesting effects you could do with powdered pastel and watercolor, and also oil pastel, China marker, like a crayon, colored pencil. And I started to find you could do all kinds of interesting effects and textures. So that's how it kind of evolved. How I stumbled, I have to admit, and I'm not actually clear, like how did I stumble into doing pastels? I'm not, I have to admit, I'm not 100% sure. I was on the Pen and Ink cartoon thing, and I just started screwing around with pastels. At first, I have a whole bunch of works I did early on that were colors on a black background. So that's when I was first started experimenting. And then one day I made like a landscape. It looked sort of like a seascape and like these powdery pastels. And I went like, oh, that's interesting. And then I kind of ran with that. So it just all sort of evolved.
Okay. When you were creating these, I would say, works, and I know that a lot of people, they use their hands, or do you use any other tools or anything when you were working with pastel, or just hands?
Yeah, I have a lot of little gimmicks I came up with. I know a lot of people shade with their fingers with pastel. I was even looking at some fantastic old illustrations from pastel, and I read the artist just used his fingers. But that could almost seem like a little, maybe not the greatest practice somehow. But so I started experimenting, yes, with common objects you can create textures with pastels. So I've used, giving away my secrets now. I've used cotton balls, Q-tips, crumpled up pieces of paper. I actually found recent, like if you take like a textured piece of paper, like a watercolor paper, and actually use that to apply the pastel, you can get all kinds of interesting patterns. So yeah, I've done all kinds of experiments with different just commonplace items to apply pastel. Sponges. So not just my shading with the fingers like some artists do with pastel.
Of course. So I also saw on your bio, you said that you were, or you are also a musician.
Yes.
So I would say that, do you think that your style of this whimsical and like magical world or like nature, do you think it also connects to your identity being a musician?
I've thought about that. I'm not totally sure there's that direct a connection. So I'm mostly a classical musician. There is some. It's that's hard to say. I will say that one artist who's not maybe considered classical, it actually influenced me. My work is the kind of the new agey singer she's sometimes referred to, Enya. And years ago, I stumbled onto the song by Enya. I think it's her famous song, Only Time. And I said, wow, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. And I started getting very into like the music of Enya. And she sort of creates this like very magical world in her singing. I mean, it's very almost overproduced in the studio, but it does create a very interesting vibe. And I would have to say that music, almost more than like something like Mozart, influenced my work. Yes. So, but that's not music I've directly played very much, except occasionally. I actually have some colleagues who've worked with her, but not me. So that's kind of a direct connection. Yes, that artist, Enya. Yes, I'd say so. But it's a little hard for me to, I mean, sure, there must be a musical connection there, but the music has been such a part of my life. It's my profession, it's my work, so it's I'm sure there's a connection there, but I'm not a directly conscious connection like, oh, I was inspired by this Brahms symphony, so I created this piece of work, or Mozart. I only once read something about Mozart that someone said there was that Mozart's work music is kind of an escape from the miserable world, the daily world, that early classical music. So in some ways, I consider my work as a little bit as escapist from the misery of the world. I used to indulge in misery in my work, and now I kind of went another direction, like creating something that's like a better world out there. I don't know, or some magical imaginary world or other planet. Anyway, again, I might be straying from the topic, but the not necessarily a direct connection with music, except I was inspired by that singer.
Okay, so I think this will probably be the last question, but
okay.
I know you said that, or from what I heard, you've came a long way from where you've started and to where you're right now. And I also remember that you mentioned that maybe some point in your career, you will go back to the style that you were into. I'm just wondering, will you currently or in the near future be continuing this practice with pastel, with these colors and with this world that you're creating? Is that where you see yourself in the near future, creating artworks?
Yeah, I definitely want to continue on this track, and I do have all kinds of ideas percolating for works that I want to create. And one of my goals, and I don't think maybe so many artists, they're frustrated. You have like a vision and putting it on the paper, but I feel I sometimes see in my mind's eye like these very, very dramatic, monumental kind of landscapes, like very dramatic. And I feel like I want to go further that direction. But on the other hand, I do often have ideas for cartoons, for political. I have a lot of ideas for like political social commentary cartoons, which I was doing in part years ago. And sometimes feel I do want to return to those roots also. But the main thrust of what I'm doing is continuing to do the pastels and trying to realize even more, these kind of whatever visions I have in my head of these
Definitely.
gigantic
They're wonderful.
landscapes. Oh, I appreciate that.
They're really pretty. I'm really excited to actually see your works in the gallery. They're just, when I saw them, the way you're using pastel, I know it's really hard for myself to actually create a landscape or anything that gives you the feeling of that vast, that feeling that you just feel when you see a painting. And I'm just really excited to see your work.
Oh, I'm glad so glad you like it. I do think part of what informs my work, though, is that I did have a certain amount of very formal training in art. And I studied a lot of figure drawing and anatomy. And I had teachers like this. I studied with this great sculptor and this comic book artist, and they talked a lot about volume, about having a sense of 3D and volume and perspective. And so that even though I'm doing these very kind of dreamy landscapes, I think that the study of the figure and copying out of anatomy books and also learning about perspective, and I'm sure these are all things you've studied yourself, but and learning about how things, the thinking in 3D, thinking of forms as thinking in three dimensions, in three dimensions, and also having a lot of study of perspective, especially the artist in the comic book gentleman I studied with, a lot about putting objects in perspective. I think that's all kind of in there, that even though I've deviated away from doing the figure right now and from making cartoons or comics, that it's kind of, and also how to make lines, like how to make like vibrant, how to make what my comic book artist teacher called, his name was Ken Langrath, called don't make scuzzy lines. He used to say, don't make scuzzy lines. So I think that's all in there. Training, making dynamic lines, thinking in perspective, thinking in volumes. Like if I have a smudge on the paper, like maybe even accidentally, all of a sudden I can see that, oh, there's a front, there's a side to it. The light's coming from this side, it's illuminating that, it's making that part dark, or it's receding toward the horizon. And I can kind of see all those forms, I think, from the background. I feel I'm lucky to have had. I didn't have the amount of training I've had as a musician in art, but I do feel grateful to people I studied with.
Okay.
I hope I'm not.
No. Everything is so great. It was very great to see you. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for today's interview.
Sure.
And I will contact you through email again, I believe. Thank you for today, everything.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
As always, we would like to thank our sponsors for giving us the opportunity to host this event.